This right-of-way corridor behind us has been a traveler's path for over 150 years. It started as a railroad corridor for timber, agriculture, and for goods. Today, it's an explorer's path for recreation. It represents the evolution of rail-to-trail projects across the nation.
It's the many stories, the unlikely history. It's the evolution and the lives of people who have lived along this rail line.
And they once made a living. And interestingly, some of the people along the rail still make a living because of the rail. Join us as we explore the Kal-Haven Trail from Kalamazoo to South Haven. I'm Chuck.
I'm Poppins.
Let's go check it out. So we're gonna take a ride on the Kal-Haven Trail, and these are our chariots. So the Kalamazoo and South Haven Railroad got its start in 1836 when Kalamazoo said, you know, it'd be really cool to have a port that we have access to by railroad, and then we can distribute goods. But the financial panic in 1837 took away any hope for funds for the railroad. So the idea was put on hold for about 25 years when the idea came back. So a group of business dudes from Kalamazoo finally filed the Articles of Incorporation in 1869, and they started building the railroad. But they relied on the towns along the route to raise taxes for the railroad, and unfortunately most of the towns didn't exist yet. So they immediately, like most railroads in the 1800s, ran out of funding or had a really tough time getting it. But then in 1870, the Michigan Central Railroad bought $600,000 worth of bonds so that the line could be completed. And if you can imagine, the Michigan Central pretty much now own the Kalamazoo and South Haven Railroad. After they built the railroad, the towns then started springing up and then building the depots that they needed. So the railroad was pretty successful in transporting the goods and the services they need between Kalamazoo and its port city of South Haven. It lasted for 101 years, which is pretty decent for a railroad. And then there wasn't a lot of demand for the railroad anymore, so it was closed. So riding a number of miles in a lawn chair is not too bad at all. So one of the first hamlets you come to on the Kalamazoo and South Haven rail corridor is Alamo Center, which was established in 1841, and it gets its name from Davy Crockett's last stand at the Alamo, I think in 1836. At the end of the decade of the 1830s, the country really had a soft spot in its heart for the Alamo and its last stand in the war against the Mexican forces in Texas. So to remember the Alamo, the residents of Kalamazoo County named one of their new townships Alamo Township. And Alamo was actually just the post office smack dab in the center of the township. And it used to be called Alamo Center PO for post office.
So now we're in Williams, named for Chester Williams. More about him later. But first, this land had been a Potawatomi summer residence. So the Potawatomi, they would come here in May and plant their gardens and set up their homes right by the river. And then they would live here all summer long, and then in September, when the crop stopped producing, they would all move south to warmer weather. So Chester Williams came here in 1854 and started farming this land. By 1895, the town had a population of 100 people, and there were two main companies. There was Williams Hoop and Heading Company, and then there was the Shields Brick Company. And Patrick Shields used his bricks to help build the Kalamazoo State Hospital. He shipped some to Grand Rapids and Dowagiac, and he used his bricks to build this 4,400 square foot home for his wife and 10 children.
That's a lot of children, Poppins. So as you get further out in the trail, right around Mentha, the trail kind of quiets down. There's not nearly as much traffic, at least on a Friday. How's it going, Poppins? So our next stop I find it very interesting. It's what used to be the town of Mentha, which is down the rail line a little ways, and there's like just one house left.
So apparently, Albert May Todd purchased 2,000 acres in 1901. He dug 15 miles of drainage ditches in this area, and he grew peppermint. So Albert planted Black Mitcham English peppermint, which is sampled here and here. And by 1920, Albert produced 98% of the peppermint for our nation. And the peppermint was used in Wrigley's double mint gum.
Wow, it's just not any peppermint they're growing here. Apparently they're growing Todd's Black Mitcham peppermint. Whoa.
Wow, that is powerful.
Poppins is going to go over and get some water, but imagine fields, all these fields here in both directions, 2,000 acres planted with that peppermint. That's a lot of peppermint. And not only that, not only did he have these 2,000 acres, but at its peak, he had over 10,500 acres of peppermint farms. If the Viking was a good guy, he'd probably hold the bucket for her pump, but he didn't wait for me, Poppins. Poppins always has to pitch in and lend a hand.
Or pitch a fit.
So A.M. Todd is actually a great story about capitalism and you know, building your own business. Look at these drainage ditches and how deep they were. So he found a mucky soil swamp area. He drained it out, and a lot of people thought he was kind of crazy, but he built these ditches to drain it out. And these are impressive. You can see, look at how far down that is. That's like 10 feet, 16 feet down to the bottom of the ditch. That's a crazy undertaking. The thing that Todd did is that he took some European methods for growing peppermint, and he studied the chemistry because he had studied chemistry, but his trip to Europe taught him how to cultivate the peppermint, so his crops were quite successful. And not only that, but his business was built on his double distilling process that he eventually developed. And most peppermint at the time, they would have to add chemicals to get the peppermint to market. And he used to expose all the imitations by doing some chemistry with them to say, see, this stuff's fake. And as Poppins said, yeah, he ruled the world in peppermint. By the way, I like wintergreen, but Poppins is a fan of peppermint. So the A.M. Todd Company continued to thrive, and he passed away in 1931 at the age of 81. But it remained a family business and thrived until about 2011, when it was sold to the Swiss company Wild Flavors. And they still maintain the facility in Kalamazoo. So we're gonna head down the trail and we're gonna take a look at what's left of Mentha. So here's the crossroads of the rail and the road that went to Mentha. And Mentha was a thriving community that had rows of houses. It had a school, a library, and A.M. Todd took really good care of his people. But I think all that's left today is this house. This is kind of where the town was along this road. And they would grow the crops here, they would process the peppermint, they would distill it, and then they would ship it out on the railroad. Quite a story here. So when the railroad came through Bloomingdale, Michigan, Augustus Haven donated this park so that they could build a depot and eventually have a park. And then in May of 1870, the town here of Bloomingdale was established. And they still have the original 1870 rail depot. So you always wonder when you see these markers by a railroad, what do they mean? Well, a W means that it's time to whistle or to blow your whistle because you're coming up on a crossing or a reason to blow your whistle. So that's what the W means on these rail markers. You can even see a historic caboose. Behind me, you can find an interesting piece of history related to the oil boom that actually happened in Bloomingdale. At one time, they had over 437 oil wells. 45 of them were within the town, and if there wasn't a house or a person there, they basically drilled an oil well. And in this picture, one of the houses that oil had just been sprayed on, and she was cleaning it off because an oil pump had blew and sprayed the house. The house that she's cleaning off was paid for entirely from oil and mineral right leases for the oil that came to this town. So it was quite an oil boom. The old caboose is kind of in disrepair, so and they have to move it from this side over here, and they're looking for help and some donations to do that. The Bloomingdale, I think, Area Historical Society. So if you can lend a hand, that would be great. So as we're poking around Bloomingdale, we noticed over here a business called the Bloomingdale Telephone Company, which I thought was strange. I haven't seen really anything with telephone company on a business in a long time. It's an interesting story. A guy named Arthur Shaw, who was a farmer, had a sick son. Bloomingdale had a telephone that was operated by the Kibby Telephone Company, which is a town that way that we're going to visit. And his son was sick, but he didn't have a telephone to call to Bloomingdale. So he saddled up his horse, he rode to his neighbors, and this is 1905, and made the phone call. The doctor came out, and everything was fine. But Mr. Shaw inquired about having a telephone at his farm because he's got 4 children, and they said, sure, as long as you provide and set all the poles needed for your independent line. So he went and he talked to his neighbors, and he said, hey, let's all get hooked up on this, have a party line and connect to the phone system. So they all contributed like $14. They raised $300. They bought the poles, they set the poles, and then the line was run. Today, the Bloomingdale Telephone Company and Bloomingdale Communications, that family business still exists, I guess.
That you're putting the bloom back in Bloomingdale.
That's the goal.
While we were in Bloomingdale, we had the opportunity to meet some of the amazing people giving their time and effort to keep history alive and the towns along the trail beautiful. We didn't catch her name, but her dedication and spirit will remain in our memory for a long time. You're just kind of out here doing it on your own, right?
The village is paying me for the brick. I started with that garden there because I could not stand that it was just a lot of weeds, beautiful. Literally. No, this would be the 3rd year.
Yeah, still.
Because the first year I needed to dig it up.
It's beautiful.
It was good enough soil. It was just I needed to hand dig all the weeds out.
All along the trail are these amazing boards, and Dan Spiegel from the Friends of the Kal-Haven Trail said that this provides context and texture to people's journeys along the path. We're here in Belmont, and this was started in 1871, known as Bear Lake Mills, because Bear Lake is just over there. By the 1880s, Belmont had about 100 residents, and then by the 1900s, this became a famous, well-known vacation spot. So in 1927, the YMCA opened Camp Kilbourne, and Joe Louis, the heavyweight boxer, trained here. He also relaxed. He ran with his trainer, Freddie Wilson. And in 1950, it became the Van Buren Youth Camp.
And about 7 miles out from South Haven is
Irvington popped up north of the tracks. And then a rival community was platted south of the tracks. Well, the railroad company insisted that they join and become one community. And rumor has it, legend has it, that the name Lakota came from a Western style book.
So our next stop on the trail is a ghost town called Kibby. And a guy named John Tripp came from upstate New York in 1880. And he had a general store, a mill. He served as the postmaster and the telephone and railroad agent, and he eventually started the Kibby Telephone Company, which laid about 1,400 miles of telephone line, eventually reaching all the way back to Kalamazoo. But our friends at the Bloomingdale Telephone Company eventually bought them out. But by the 1940s, there were about 35 residents left, and the post office was finally closed in 1945. And Kibby, for the most part, became a ghost town. But our interest in Kibby is not necessarily the history, but that's where we're going to spend the night. At the KalHaven Outpost, a pretty unique campground. Nice to meet you. So yeah, so a school bus, what's the story on that? You just found it and like, let's put it out there.
Pretty much, yeah. We're just kind of floating around Facebook, and guys about a half hour north of here, we bought it from them, finished the conversion. And
That's cool.
now it's chilling in the woods.
Scott, Carrie, Rob, and Heather are two couples who took a risk to bring their dreams to life. Their story seems to echo the story of entrepreneurs along the trail for the past century and a half. They've created more than a unique experience on this old travel corridor. They've created an authentic community that aspires to find the good in life.
Hit a campground one day, but I'm thinking like when I'm 60, you know? It's an awesome experience. Is 50 acres. I can go by the pond. If I don't want to go by the pond, I can go by the big playground. If I don't want to go there, I can go in the woods, you know? So it's kind of nice. But we got married here on property the year after we opened.
Nice.
So we got married in the year that we opened, 2016.
We'll talk to you soon, hopefully. Off we go to our campsite. I could have actually taken the road, but I want to check out the corn crib gathering place. Oh, Poppins. All right, so a lot of you have asked where Poppins comes from, or if that's her real name or whatever, but it's actually her call sign that we used to use on expeditions. It's her radio call sign. And she's called Poppins because she is the embodiment of Mary Poppins. Kids are drawn to her. She inspires kids. She's taught kids for 30 years. She's nannied for, I don't know, a decade. So for almost the past half century, she's been an inspiration to kids. Her real name's Martha, but on this trip for Poppins, I decided to do something for her. And we got a campsite that's called the Schoolie. So let's check it out. And it is the short bus, but don't judge us.
Look at this. What a darling bus.
Well, now this is kind of cozy. Wait.
What a creative idea. I love that they have a vision and they could see it, and they made this whole campground. It's absolutely darling.
They're one of the examples of, as we go from the history of the trail or the railroad, now we come to the trail, people that make a living along the trail, and they say they get a fair amount of business from the trail. So this is the Schoolie, one of those hipster camping experiences that we're doing.
To have the vision to look at an old bus and say, you know what a guy could do.
So long down the trail, our bellies are full, so we're gonna relax. Thunderstorms for tonight, so that should be exciting. We'll have to close the windows, and luckily we have some training on how to do that. I've done it before, so.
I am so excited to sleep in a school bus.
I don't know what she's excited about. I slept every day for like 12 years in a school bus. So, Poppins, how was your thunderstorm sleep last night?
It's good. It was cozy in here.
So for those of you that are thinking about riding the trail, just a little bit of advice. If you start in South Haven and go to Kalamazoo, you're going to be going uphill the entire way. But if you start in Kalamazoo and go to South Haven, you'll be going downhill.
So in 1971, this rail line was abandoned. In 1973, a group of residents from South Haven and Kalamazoo got together, and they had this brainstorm to make this a multi-use trail. This trail ended up being the second oldest rail to trail, and it's the oldest linear state park trail here in Michigan.
So I don't think the DNR was convinced in the beginning that they wanted to do a linear state park, but they did. And there was quite a bit of protest from the people that own land along the trail. And those protests ranged from attending the public meetings and saying no, to actually blocking the trail so that they put no trespassing signs on it and put gates across it and fences across it. But eventually, 16 years after the first vision in 1989, the trail was built and opened. And now we have the KalHaven Trail, which really is a beautiful trail and well worth the trip. So as you're coming into South Haven, the rivers started coming together. And what I can only assume is a Boy Scout project based on all of the important adverbs and adjectives that are on these steps. that the Boy Scouts created whatever is here. Well, it looks like there's a Poppins here. Oh, look at this. It looks like a rustic campsite. I honestly don't know if you can use it, but there's no signs that say you can't.
So, if you know who made this campsite, was it an Eagle project or was it the state? Let us know in the comments.
We're almost to South Haven, Poppins. You ready to finish it up?
Yep.
It's all downhill from here, except a couple uphill spots, I would imagine. When you start to see all the large boats and marinas, you know you're getting close to South Haven. Brand new blue wheeler, huh?
Yeah.
Nice. So when you get to South Haven, big old parking lot. You got the trailhead shelter. Got some tools over there. You can make a donation if you want. Got some information from the Heritage Trail Project. Generally a pretty nice little trailhead, eh, Poppins?
Sure is.
So of course, if you take the Kal-Haven Trail, your reward, if you come from Kalamazoo, is South Haven. With the canal and with the catwalk that goes out to the Red Lighthouse. It's like a West Michigan tradition. From the western end of the Kal-Haven Trail, I'm Chuck.
I'm Poppins.
The channel's Restless Viking. Thanks for coming along with us.